Joining us now is an MSNBC senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard, MSNBC senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, and senior executive editor at Bloomberg Opinion, Tim O'Brien. Vaughn, the president had ignored reporters' questions about Epstein yesterday, last night, in fact. How's he trying to frame all this now?
Well, he's not trying too hard to frame it, actually. Let's be clear. Usually he interjects on pretty much any issue and tries to shape and mold the way that it's being publicly discussed. But when the president's been offered that opportunity ever since these emails that were received from the Epstein estate and given out to the public by the House Oversight Committee, the president has largely, outside of social media posts, remained mum, at least verbally. And take a listen to last night when reporters tried to ask him about the files.
Mr. President, can you respond to these Epstein emails that were released today? Mr. President, any comment on these Epstein emails, sir?
Silence there again. I think we should note, just earlier this morning in a social media post, he posted a clip from Fox in a segment about the Epstein files with, in all caps, quote, the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Of course, the president, over the course of 10 years, has made it a theme to take bad headlines that put him into a negative light, whether it be the investigation over his campaign's ties to Russians who attempted to interfere in the 2016 election, to COVID. He called the pandemic a hoax as an effort to try to undermine his presidency. We are seeing the same thing play out. But what has been revealed here by these documents released here this week is that in private communications, Jeffrey Epstein is alleging that Donald Trump, knew about the girls, was one quote, but that Donald Trump clearly had stronger connections and ties to Jeffrey Epstein than the current president has let on in the past. He just earlier this summer had suggested that he was unaware of any sexual assault or misconduct directed towards the girls outside of Jeffrey Epstein being a creep. But what these documents, which the Department of Justice said that they had previously released all relevant documents, is opening up the door to is the fact that Donald Trump had a much closer and tethered relationship with the individual who was convicted and served life sentence for sex trafficking and a sexual assault.
Vaughn, these new comments and this reporting that the president's team views the Epstein issue as a losing battle for the White House. Tell us more about just their perspective and their strategy moving forward, given they think they aren't going to win this discharge petition issue.
Right. You could see many more House Republicans signing on to actually vote in favor of having the Department of Justice release all of the files in their possession. But then you're looking at the reality is that when this makes it to the Senate, that it will require Democrats and 13 Republicans to vote to have it ultimately get to the president's desk. And that's when the president is going to be left with the decision whether to sign his name and order the Department of Justice to release all of the documents. Because even at this point in time, the House Oversight Committee, with the signature of Republican Chair James Comer, back in August, they actually subpoenaed the Department of Justice. And the House Oversight Committee, the Democratic members are contending that the DOJ is breaking the law by failing to comply with that initial subpoena here. And so there's a potential contempt of Congress charge. Of course, the ones that would ultimately bring that charge would be the Department of Justice, which is the very agency that is refusing to release the files in the first place. So there's a question of exactly how and if there's enough members in Congress that could override the president's veto here. In terms of strategy, I think, again, you go back to that Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, has really been the only one who has been vocally outspoken. And that's largely because it came in the form of a press briefing where she was asked multiple specific questions, and she continued to deny wrongdoing by the president of the United States. But I think that this is really going to become increasingly difficult for the president, who had suggested on the campaign trail that he would be open to releasing the files. But with every document that comes out, it clearly shows that the president, at least at the minimum, was aware of a power dynamic and a power infrastructure of other elite and powerful individuals who were aware of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and the predatory nature in which they went about what ended up being a very clearly unlawful and sex trafficking ring that a great many people were at least indirectly aware of.
Right. And we were told there are 1,000+ victims of that sex trafficking ring, according to the DOJ. Tim, you wrote about your personal experiences with Trump and Epstein and how they would talk about each other in light of the email drop here this week. What can you tell us, and how does what we're learning this week, I guess, comport with what you have seen personally and heard personally?
I mean, well, they clearly were, very, very good friends. In 2005, Trump took me on a tour of a Palm Beach mansion that he had won in a bidding war with Epstein, and he emphasized to me that they were close enough that business wasn't going to get in the way of their friendship, even though he had beat him out in that deal. He has repeatedly denied, ever since this became an issue, that they were very close, but the fact is they were very close friends. It is a classic truism of prosecutions and court battles that if people don't have anything to hide, they simply are transparent and come clean. So the fact that the president, who has the ability to ask the Justice Department to order the Justice Department to do his bidding on any number of issues, including releasing more of the Epstein-related documents, isn't doing so, and he's taking to Twitter today to try to recast this as a Democratic hoax, I think shows how concerned he is about it. It's worth reminding your audience that all of this began out of the MAGA sphere. The Epstein conspiracy was promoted by Trump and other members on the far right. And the outrage that began when the DOJ dropped their investigation in July came from the right initially, not from Democrats. So this has been propelled forward by Trump's own supporters and his own base. And so the question here is, yes, we're getting more details about the nature of his proximity to Epstein, but I don't think that that's the issue that is holding Donald Trump's attention in such a dramatic way, and why he's ordering everyone around him to stonewall. There's two sort of baskets of problems for him here. It's either it's going to come out that he was trafficked, that women were trafficked to him by Epstein. There's no evidence of that so far. Trump hasn't been accused of any crimes, but that is out there. The other piece of it is whether or not he used Epstein for financial services. Epstein moved money all over the world. He helped billionaires like Leon Black lower their taxes. And I think that's an underexplored avenue in all this that is possibly another thing that Trump is worried about.
Tim, just on the politics of this moment, we have seen Republican lawmakers bend to the will of Donald Trump over and over again in this administration, and yet he couldn't convince these allies of his in the House to remove their names from the discharge petition. What does that tell you?
Well, because, there's actually been a bipartisan push here. Let's remember that it was Representatives Thomas Massie of Kentucky, a Republican, and Ro Khanna of California, a Democrat, who jointly corralled all the votes they needed to get a floor vote over the head of Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who has done everything he can to stonewall this. And that's why you're going to get a floor vote on the House next week. And I think representatives in their districts are close to their voters. They understand that this is an issue the voters care about, because the story that Donald Trump and his allies told was that Jeffrey Epstein had documents and the goods on elite people and elite institutions that were smothering the needs of average voters. And when Trump got into the White House, he was going to allow transparency to shine on all of this. And now he's not. And the question remains, why not?
Lisa, let me ask you about something else that caught our eye this week in the last couple of days. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche got into a bit of a social media skirmish and admitted in this post he was responding to George Conway, who, of course, has been very critical of the Trump administration and is a very high-profile lawyer himself. He admits here that the Justice Department didn't have these materials that have been released now by the House Oversight Committee when he went and interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's convicted co-conspirator, in prison earlier this year. Your reaction to that?
That doesn't surprise me. First of all, it's not entirely clear from reading the transcripts of Todd Blanche's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell what documents he reviewed. It was not a document-heavy interview. In fact, it was light on documents entirely, right? Normally, if you take a deposition, you're showing people communications in which they were involved, and you're asking them to explain Now, from the benefit of hindsight, what were you thinking at the time? What was that person communicating to you? How did you understand that? None of that took place. It was all very high level and really designed for the purpose of that one statement where Ghislaine Maxwell says, I never saw Trump do anything inappropriate. He always was a gentleman to me. That is all Todd Blanche wanted from those 2 days. Now, when he says the Department of Justice didn't have these emails, I actually believe that. And that's because at the time that DOJ conducted its investigation, it did 2 raids, one of Jeffrey Epstein's home in New York, one of his home in the Virgin Islands. They took a bunch of stuff, including electronics, including, for example, multiple iPads. But we don't know if they got the full totality of his emails or if they even knew all of the private email accounts that he used. I think one of the reasons that the Trump administration is locked down in the way that they are about the discharge petition is because they don't know to what extent the universe of DOJ's materials and the universe that the estate now controls are overlapping or not. And it doesn't shock me that many of these communications were themselves a surprise to the White House.
Well, I think it does open more doors for questioning whether they even were aware of all the information that's out there and if that could then warrant reopening some kind of investigation into the Epstein files. Let's put a pin in this for now. Lisa, stay with me. Von Hilliard, Tim O'Brien, thank you.